Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandy Ramirez. I am a sophomore, considering either a major in political science or SOAM, which is sociology and anthropology. And today's speech is titled A View from the Border. As a daughter of immigrants from Central America, born and raised in Houston, Texas, a state that has one of the highest numbers of undocumented Mexican immigrants, discussions about ICE, immigration, and deportation are incredibly important to me and my community members from back home. I have had family members and friends who have been deported, detained, or caught trying to cross the border. I'm grateful that Carleton College has invited Valerie Gonzalez to be our speaker for today. Gonzalez is an investigative reporter for The Monitor who has previously worked for the Rio Grande Valley Morning Star, the Brownsville Herald, and has written for and been featured in several other news sources, including The Guardian and the Houston Chronicle. As an investigative reporter, Gonzalez has focused her research on the Texas-Mexico border, writing about topics such as immigration, federal courts, cartel violence, and the Border Patrol, just to name a few. At a time where transparency from the government and other institutions of power in the U.S. are a must, Gonzalez has written stories that focus on the pain caused by violence and criminality and deportation at the individual and systemic level. And she has made these news stories accessible for both English and Spanish-speaking populations on both sides of the border. Gonzalez has shown the capacity to persist and persevere despite the gravity of her job. She has traveled around the Texas state and at the Texas-Mexico border, gathering evidence and other important source materials, taking videos and photographs, interviewing witnesses, and taking charge by directly pursuing leads on the news stories she has reported on. She has shown the dedication necessary to report on these painful topics and has translated these stories for communities they impact the most. So without further ado, please welcome Valerie Gonzalez to Carleton College.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for coming. It is a great honor to be here. You guys have such a beautiful campus and really, really charming city, so I'm really fortunate to be here, thank you. I'm from the border, I'm born and raised. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I have never been this far up north, so I'm very, it's just very surreal to be around snow. You guys made it look like it was fun. And I think that was propaganda that I believed in for many years, but it's lovely, and I just want to thank you for welcoming me and inviting me. So yeah, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, just so you know who was talking to you. I was born in Laredo. Laredo is I'll show you in a map where we are, but we are on the border with Tamaulipas, which is a Mexican border state. And I graduated from TAMU. It's a state school there. I have a degree in English and a minor in studio art. You won't hear journalism in there, but I actually got into journalism trying to avoid my fate with an English degree in Laredo, Texas, which would have been a school teacher. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's very challenging work, and I did not want to do that. So I got into TV in 2010 as a news producer, working on the weekends, and then I worked overnight shift. At some point I was going to work at 12 at night. It was not a good schedule, and I don't drink coffee. I've never drank coffee, which apparently is very rare for people in my business. But 3 years later, I transitioned into reporting, and so I started reporting in 2013. And I did that for many years. I didn't plan on leaving Laredo. Laredo's home, my family's there. If you're Hispanic, I'm not sure if you guys are or have friends who are, but you know that it's kind of expected for you to kind of stay close to your family. It's not also expected, but it's also something that you really want to do. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to leave, but then opportunity came in 2017 with a TV station 2.5 hours away, and decided to to try it, and I really fell in love with the valley. That's where I'm working now, the Rio Grande Valley. It's what's an area of 4 counties in the southern tip of Texas, and I'll show you right now where that is. And a year ago, I moved from working in TV to working in print, which has been very rewarding, and I think something that I probably should have done 10 years ago. I'm a member of the Investigative Reporters and Editors organization. It's a really great organization if you're a journalist. I didn't study journalism, but I feel like that was my school. That's where I learned so many things. I met so many mentors. And throughout the years of my reporting, I have focused on immigration, cartel violence, drugs, border patrol, like you heard, and some of the Mexican violence. And it's been challenging to stay on top of all of that. So you'll see a little bit of what I've done, and I'm going to show you my reel, which is what news reporters use to move from market to market. It just kind of gives you a video resume of what I've done. I'm just going to show you like the first 30 seconds. This was outside of a federal court building, and this defendant was just leaving his initial appearance, and I just wanted to ask him for comment. Sir? So a lot of my job is about going after, trying to get answers, trying to get people to comment, getting kicked out of places. And I've worked mostly in Laredo and in the Rio Grande Valley, but I've also gone to the Mexican side of that area and El Paso just once or twice, I think. Mainly was for the shooting that happened a few years ago. I've used data, court records to kind of try to do a decent job of, trying to get the big picture. Familiar with public record requests and federal requests as well. Then you gotta get creative with how you tell your story. So that's kind of what that's about. So let me just show you where we are on the map. This is a really good map to kind of just show the overall Texas border. You see we have 4 Mexican states bordering with Texas. We have Chihuahua, which is up with El Paso. Then a little further down, we're Del Rio, we have Coahuila, and then we have Nuevo León, which is very well known for Monterrey. And then just south of that, we have Tamaulipas, which is the state that kind of, it's kind of a very weird shape, and I'll show you right now. This is the Rio Grande Valley. This is where I'm stationed at right now. This is a coverage area that I focus on most of the time. And you'll know the valley mostly by like McAllen or Edinburgh. Those are like the big cities, Bronzeville, where we have SpaceX now, or in that area in Cameron County. Hidalgo County has probably the most, the densest, the mostly populated area with about 850,000 people. But altogether, it's about 1.4 million. Probably greater than the census estimates because we do have a large number of people who are not documented and they don't report to the census, especially after the rhetoric from the previous administration that really scared a lot of people from participating. Here we have Tamaulipas, so this is the state that borders with Texas. And it is important to understand the geography just for context later. But up at the top, we have Nuevo Laredo, which is the city right across from where I was born, and I have family there. I used to go there 3-4 times a week when we were younger, and now it's very different. Then you go further down south, and you have Mier, Camargo, and Ordaz. That's what's known as the Frontera Chica, or the short border, and it's right across from Starr County. This is important for later. Then we have Reynosa, which is the largest border city in Tamaulipas. It's probably my favorite too. It's beautiful. They've got so much. They have so much culture. They have so much just events all the time. Then a little further down south, at the very tip actually, is Matamoros and Bronzeville. So Matamoros is the Mexican sister city of Bronzeville. And then the Ciudad Victoria, their capital, is all the way, down there. So what's important about this is that we're looking at it and we're thinking, different governments, right? Different routes to get to where you need to go. But all of that is also very important when you consider the cartels, because they also have their territory carved out, and you're not going to see that in the map. Well, at least not, public ones. But I can just tell you briefly that on the Nuevo Laredo side, you have the main part from like Mier all the way up to Nuevo Laredo. You have the Cartel del Noreste, the CDN, and they have the paramilitary arm known as Tropa del Infierno, which is the Hell Troopers. And then from Mier to Ordaz, that's the Frontera Chica, the short border. That is a piece of territory that's always just historically the area where the CDN and the CDG, which operates in the Reynosa Matamoros area, that's kind of where they clash, because they're always trying to gain more territory. So there's always conflict, even though there's not a lot of people living there. There's even less now because of the conflict. It is a very highly contentious area to live in. Even though the Cartel del Golfo, the CDG, Gulf Cartel, they operate from Reynosa to Matamoros, they have different factions, and so they're also sometimes in conflict. And what they want is obviously routes. They want to smuggle people, they want to ensure the drug routes, cash, and weapons as well, coming from the north. Nuevo Laredo is a really beautiful place because I'm from there, right? I have family there, I grew up there. And we used to go there, like I said, 3-4 times a week when I was young. It was not the same Nuevo Laredo that we know of today. And I just want to show you what it looks like from certain points of view. And on the left side, we have state police. And on the right side, we have just regular citizens. So I'm going to play these videos briefly just to show you what it looks like to be caught in a gun battle.
Agresiones en el interior del hotel Villarreal. Está fuerte el enfrentamiento. Estamos en medio de fuego cruzado. Van tirando con calibre 50, R15 y al parecer 4. Eso está muy en pila.
He's saying that they are receiving gunfire, 50 caliber, and so they're near a hotel. I used to pass by the hotel often, actually, and obviously it wasn't like that. But 50 caliber can obviously destroy a person. There's no surviving that if you get hit by it. This is kind of tame compared to the other video. No one's gonna get shot here, so I don't wanna, that won't happen. These people just got caught in the middle. Obviously, they didn't have anywhere to go, so they got out. They're hiding behind their vehicle. And you can hear the woman is clearly terrified. She's praying. And then, for a brief second, they think it's over. It just keeps going. That is the Tropa del Infierno, and that's how you normally see them. They don't hide. They have areas in Nuevo Laredo where they just openly gather. They ride around in these trucks. Many of them are stolen from the U.S., either actually stolen from the U.S. or someone drives their vehicle over and then they take their vehicle. It happens all the time. I have a truck and I don't take it over there. But they ride around. They have their name on the side of the trucks, like you see, and most of the time, sometimes they're just kind of like driving around. My ex used to live there for a while, and one time he drove with this really little car, and one time he was just driving to drop off a date, and all of a sudden he was just surrounded by these trucks, and he was just terrified, but they didn't do anything, they were just driving. But it is fairly common to see them, and they, like I said, they don't hide. They also operate a lot of times just out in the open. When I went to Nuevo Laredo the last time, which was about 2 years ago, it was very militarized. We talk about militarization on the border, but this was the actual military. This was state police, and you do have the Marines, National Guard on the Mexican side. And I remember driving around, and my ex, he was telling me, yeah, you have to drive here with your windows just kind of cracked. You don't want them all the way down, because you don't want to give anyone the opportunity to come and steal from you or hold you up when you're at a stoplight. And it seems like it's all about not getting caught at a red light when you're driving. So you have to try and, drive carefully, but also keep an eye down the road, especially if the sun is setting. Then I know that he would always look down each road just to make sure that none of those trucks were just, coming down the road, and I mean, they don't care if they get into an accident, but you always have to be on high alert. So it was a very different experience going back to Nuevo Laredo after, having basically been raised there. The fight that the Mexican government has at all levels, local, state, federal, is a tough one, because the criminal organizations are obviously doing very well. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of weapons, and they're highly organized. So it's hard to know where to look unless they're working with informants, or they come across some cell phones that might help. This right here, they're finding weapons, and they're hidden underground. It's a cache of weapons. And the weapons on the right are some of the weapons that have already been seized. And this is not even the largest of weapons that I've seen seized. There was a grenade launcher, I remember, that I saw some time ago. So a lot of times the state police will be trying to defend, position or whatever, and they also have to look out that they don't get hit with a caliber of weapon that their shields can't withstand. So a lot of times, especially for the ones who are just, just the regular state police, their vehicles will have bullet holes. It's very dangerous to be police over there. But the other problem with police is that they don't keep their hands clean. A lot of times they do end up being corrupt. Corruption is a really big problem in Mexico, and so it is in Nuevo Laredo. There are some policies, now that you have a little bit of context of where we're living at, and even though I showed you videos of Nuevo Laredo, it's very similar in Reynosa and in Matamoros, although the dynamics are a little different. I would say that Matamoros is probably the safest of those three big border cities. I go to Matamoros and I go into Reynosa on my own, and I don't feel that it's as volatile as Nuevo Laredo is when I was there last, and according to the reports that I get. These three border cities are important for immigrants who come here trying to cross into the U.S. Either they come here on their own or they're brought there through smugglers. Either way, they end up in these cities, and a lot of times they get stuck there due to some policies. And the two policies that have been affecting this part of the region are what's known as Title 42 expulsions and as Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, or Remain in Mexico. It has many names, but it's all the same policy. So I have spent 24 hours in encampments that form because people get stuck on the Mexican side, and then they want to wait until something happens, and then they'll be allowed in. That's the hope. the encampments have formed in Matamoros and in Reynosa. In Matamoros, one of the largest encampments formed 2 years ago, and it just closed down last year. And this little boy, he lived there. This very sweet little boy. But I spent 24 hours in these encampments. It's not an easy thing. I had to get smuggled in into the Matamoros one because they had closed it down. The government had closed it down because they were preparing to start bringing in the migrants into the U.S. after Biden took office. They started processing the migrants who were on MPP in Matamoros to come into the U.S. So they had closed it down, and these encampments are not, even though there's security outside, they're not safe at all. I mean, I've talked to many of the migrants who have told me that, there's all kinds of things going on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. So Matamoros, again, to recap, is at the very tip of Texas, and that's where the encampment formed. I was able to stay at the encampment in Matamoros with Diana and her mom. Diana is 16. Excuse me. Sorry. And I was able to stay in the tent with Diana. Her mom had a boyfriend, and they were in a different tent. So that night I stayed with Diana. And I just want to give you just kind of a tour of what it looks like in that encampment. So you're looking at the outside of it, and it's right across the border, literally right across the bridge. That's a bridge. Then there's a plaza, and then there's a lateral park that has this fencing. So this fencing was already there, and there's this big monument. It was a very, well-liked park. A lot of people would come and run, and so it was a nice area. And when MPP started, migrants started getting sent back to Mexico. MPP is a policy that forces asylum seekers to wait on the Mexican side for the U.S. court hearings, as opposed to waiting for the U.S. court hearings in the U.S., either in ICE detention facilities or out on their own recognizance or out on bond. So MPP was a game changer, and it sent migrants back to Mexico, an area where they were, and they are, targets for the cartel without any shelter. So they formed their own shelter. And you could see, there's just everything that they can grab was something that they turned into walls or a roof. And I mean, they did have a lot of help from non-governmental organizations, but when you're braving the elements, it's very difficult to make it work either way. I went during the freeze in Texas. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but last year in February, we had a really bad freeze just all over. And I remember, maybe you guys might be used to it though, but for us, warm-blooded, but we're just really used to the heat. We can withstand temperatures of like 120. That's okay with us. So all of this was very difficult, especially for people who don't have the right gear to make it through the night in those temperatures. It was very hard on them. This is a different shelter, and in this one, there was 3 families that lived here. One of them was a pastor. The pastor was just sitting down in that chair right now. But you can see how they made these ovens just out of the materials that were there, the clay and I think some cement. But they formed these stoves that they would then operate while under shelter. Obviously not very good. Poses all kinds of dangers. But they were very welcoming whenever they had guests. She is making some plantains, which by the way are wonderful. Once you smoke them, they completely change the flavor. It's just, I never had them before until then, and it was delicious. The children were many, and they just had to find a way to keep themselves entertained. A lot of times they, especially toward the end, they weren't allowed to leave the encampment when they closed it down. So the children had to just find their own ways to entertain themselves. It was much easier in Matamoros than it is in the new encampment, and I'll show you a little bit later about that. So at night, I'd stay with Diana, And later in the evening, another woman came and stayed with her. Her name was Edie's, and you see Edie's right there. She was 25, I think, at the time, and she was showing me there a video of some migrants who are being allowed into the United States. These kinds of videos are the ones that encourage them to come, because if they see migrants getting through, then they feel that they have a chance to get through as well. So many of them have such compelling stories. It's easy to understand why they think that they might have a chance to convince a border agent, DHS official, to allow them to come in. But that wasn't the case. She was placed on MPP. Edie's lived in a separate tent, and she had started just recently. When I got there, she started staying at night with Diana, because in these encampments, it's safer to be in groups than it is to be on your own. A man tried to break into her tent twice, and it was obviously frightening. There was a lot of there's a lot of assaults that happen there, sexual assaults that would happen, and it wasn't the only thing. I remember when I was staying there, I remember hearing a car come in to the area sometime around 3 or 4 in the morning, and nobody gets up and checks, because we already know what it is. That area is close to the border, and so the cartel has to come in and take care of the business through there. So that's what it most likely was. And remember that I did say that this park was closed. This area was closed by security. So how did they get in, right? I mean, we all know. So let me just jump ahead. MPP was this program that was initiated under the Trump administration, and it was intended to keep migrants away from the border, and it was successful in doing that, because now, instead of being on the U.S. side, they were all on the Mexican side in Matamoros. So MPP, by many, is hailed as a success, as a policy. But if you talk to the people who are in it, if you talk to the people who live around it as well, the city of Matamoros was very unhappy with this. It wasn't just an eyesore for them, it was also just all these resources that all of a sudden were needed that they couldn't provide. If the U.S. has trouble providing resources for the migrants that are released on the U.S. side who are seeking asylum, you can just imagine how much more harder it is for the Mexican governments who had their federal budgets slashed to help immigrants, and they still haven't recovered that money. So a lot of the help came from non-governmental organizations, NGOs. So when MPP ends, it's right at the start of the Biden administration. They stopped enrolling people into it as soon as they got into office, and then they started to process people who were in it into the United States. We'll come back to MPP because it obviously is now in play again. But after MPP ends and the pandemic starts, Title 42 is introduced, and Title 42 is a public health policy that allows for the government to basically shut the border for anyone because of public health concerns. So Title 42 allows Border Patrol to turn everyone who comes in away. So at the beginning, that meant everyone. That meant adults, families, children. Those are the main groups that come in. And they started turning them away, but then during the Trump administration, there was some legal action that allowed for children to be allowed to stay, unaccompanied children. But the adults and the families were sent back to Reynosa. So Reynosa is just south of McAllen. There is this plaza just across about a block away from the bridge, and this is a plaza. This is like the pavilion that they have there. The United States started sending so many migrants back through Reynosa that the migrants started staying there and waiting for something to change, because Title 42 is not supposed to be in place forever. It's just temporary. It's just until the pandemic gets better. And, you know, there was times where it felt like it was going to get better. But over time, more people started staying. And you do have a lot of children who stay there with their parents. That was a day when they were getting some treats from an NGO. The bridge, this is a photo of the bridge, and there's a bag that migrants get from Border Patrol when they're released into Mexico, and it has their belongings, and you see these bags kind of littered all over, and some people get the impression that migrants are just littering, but migrants who know what they're heading to know that this is a smart thing to do. If you are a migrant who is returned to Mexico, you know what you're heading to, and that can mean that if you look like a migrant, if you have anything on you that says, I was just released from Border Patrol custody, like the sweatpants that they sometimes all get, or the shoes that they have without shoelaces, or these bags, all of these things can be markers for the cartel to tell you, oh, hey, there's a target, go after them. And it does happen, and it happens sometimes instantly. This is the plaza where they were staying at, and it grew to, I think, 4,000 at one time. I believe there might be about 2,000 now living there. And I've also stayed in this encampment for about 24 hours. I think maybe it was a few hours short. I want to say that encampment felt worse than the one in Matamoros because, as you recall, Matamoros is kind of considered a safer border than Reynosa. Reynosa is much more dangerous. I've been to this encampment, other than the 24 hours that I spent there, I've been to it many times. It's very difficult to get through. There's just so much, there's so many tents, so many, even the restroom area, it's just so packed. But, oh, sorry, it's playing again. Oh, that's what it looks like when you're there. There's tarps protecting people from the sun, because, I mean, that's mainly what the big problem is. It's very, very hot, and people are just trying to stay cool. They do manage to find ways to make money. And this is the group of women that I stayed with. I stayed on that green mattress at night. This was during the pandemic, and it was after I had gotten a vaccine, but I was staying there that night, and you just heard coughing everywhere. The children, too, and it wasn't a dry cough. They were struggling with real problems that were not diagnosed. This is all the same encampment over time. So the migrants, like I said, if they get caught by the cartel, a lot of times if they are sent to the United States and they don't make it, the cartel wants you back. You're a product, they want you back. They want you back in their stash house, and they're gonna maybe try again, help you, of course. And if not, maybe they'll just try to get some more money out of you, because if you go into the United States, they know that you have someone there, and they know that there's a source of revenue that they can tap into. So many times they also, when they come back and they don't want to go back to the cartel and the cartel finds you, that's not a good thing. But also along the way, the kidnappings are they happen if you don't have a smuggler, if your smuggler is using a route that they shouldn't have. There's just many reasons that they try to take you and scare you. And these are some of the migrants who made it to Reynosa and who had to go through very difficult things. No, they're not going to get hurt, but there are some, these are videos, if I can play them. There will be in Spanish. There might be some Spanish bad words, but I will lower it if I hear that. So. So he's asking his family to help him. He's kidnapped, please send money. This is not a game, is what he said. And these are not fake guns, these are not manufactured situations. They really are placed in these conditions. And this is obviously just proof that, hey, we have your relative, you better give us money. I don't even know how this man is necessarily breathing, but this is not the worst. Obviously, sometimes the women do get the worst part of it. I mean, everybody faces the same threat of getting killed, but I spoke to this woman at the encampment in Reynosa who had escaped a kidnapping attempt, but it wasn't after she had suffered a lot. She and her daughter had come, and they were from, I want to say, no, I don't recall actually what part they were from in Mexico, but they were on their own, and they got picked up, and the mom got separated they were in the same area, separated by a curtain. The mom was getting sexually assaulted behind the curtain, and the little girl was on the other side of it. She got beat up, and eventually they made it out. But those are success stories. I mean, they made it out. It's not guaranteed that anyone will. Oops, sorry. So these are some of the daily risks that they face at these encampments, or when they're sent back to Mexico. This is a man who's suffering heat exhaustion, and this was very common. This is not just adults. I mean, this is the effects on an adult, but you can only imagine what it was like and what it is like for children. The problem is that there's no hospitals that take migrants because they don't have money. In Mexico, they often make you pay up front, or at least have some sort of form of, assurance that you can pay. Ambulances don't go and pick up migrants. They refuse to go. There was no COVID testing at the beginning. There might be some COVID testing now. Again, limited medical care. There are some doctors who go there, like Doctors Without Borders, and there's another organization as well. And they don't, there's certain things that they cannot help you with. There was a woman, for example, who had cancer, and she had some complications from getting sick with something else. She was staying at a shelter in Reynosa, so she was a little better off than those staying in the encampments. She needed help overnight. The shelter sent her to the hospital, and the hospital refused to take her. But not only that, they asked her if she was legal. And then they said, we're going to call, what the equivalent of ICE is in Mexico. And so she just ran out of there in the middle of the night in Reynosa as a migrant, as a woman. At night, it's unthinkable, and it happens. That's, when we talk about lack of medical care, I mean, there's this refusal, and then there's harassment. So luckily, the shelter director was able to send someone to go and pick her up. But it's illegal to drive anyone in the country, in Mexico, who is not a citizen. So if you get caught by police driving someone to wherever they need to go, if maybe like a hospital or a clinic, you can be subject to a fine or to being arrested. That has happened to an NGO that I know of. Luckily, they were able to get away. So we do have a lot of problems in the camps with lack of medical care. There's also a lot of depression, and there's even suicidal children who have attempted suicide or who have thought about it. You can't imagine, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can't imagine having my child think about that. And you have parents who have had to stop that from happening. No parent, migrant or not, should have to deal with that. And in these camps, in these encampments, they have to deal with it alone most of the time. There are some mental health services, but they're limited, and they're not there 24/7. So you have to either reach out to an NGO that you might know, or otherwise just deal with it on your own, which is what most migrants do. There's sexual assault as well. I had mentioned that in the other camp. It happens. There's prostitution. There's drug use. The cartel obviously makes that possible. But prostitution just happens out of desperation for money as well. Even though there's Title 42 policy in place, there are exceptions to Title 42 that can happen. There are people who could be considered vulnerable to be allowed into the United States to seek asylum, in spite of the Title 42 policy. I know of an attorney who crossed about 1,000 people on her own through the pandemic. So it is possible. And border agents can make those determinations. But sometimes they just plain ignore the need that is there, including the child who wore these braces. She got to the border with her dad. She's about 8 years old, and the dad had to carry her most of the way. She has spina bifida and a lot of other ailments, including the father had to change her catheter, at least I think every day. That was a challenge in and of itself, just because of the logistics of finding a place to change the catheter. It's a very intimate and careful procedure that shouldn't be done just anywhere out in the open, obviously. And this is a little girl. She got to the border wearing those braces that are too small for her. Her feet were bleeding, and they finally got to the Border Patrol agents to turn themselves in, because a lot of families, especially families, not so perhaps single adults, but especially families, they want to turn themselves into Border Patrol. They want to get assistance, and this father and this little girl did that. But Border Patrol put them into Title 42 proceedings, so they turned them back when they could have made an exception. This family was sleeping on the concrete floor in Reynosa when an NGO found them. This man had to try and he borrowed a tent from someone who was living in the encampment to perform the catheter change. It wasn't performed well. The little girl got an infection, and that needed to get treated by a doctor. Fortunately, the NGO connected them with an attorney who was able to bring them through the border. But there are exceptions that can be made to Title 42 expulsions, but agents either don't want to, or they don't know how to handle this well enough to do that, and they wait for an attorney to come in with a migrant to ask for that exception. But either way, you end up with people who are suffering, sent back to Mexico to suffer even more. That is the effect. That is not always the intention. Although we have heard from many migrants that Border Patrol agents treat them disdainfully or just plain cruelly. I know many border agents who are sensitive and who do treat people humanely, but everyone is still subject to these policies, and unless the agent knows the policy well enough to make exceptions, most of them have to be sent back to Mexico. We hear a lot of talk about crisis on the border, and some people take issue with the word crisis, but in the Rio Grande Valley it is, or at least it was, especially a couple of months ago. And I know some colleagues would probably disagree, but the crisis was due to the Title 42 policies, which I mentioned before was returning everyone back to Mexico, including kids who were coming without their parents. But they started allowing the children, the unaccompanied children, to stay. Migrants figured that out and started sending their children on their own. A lot of people have the conception that this is a decision that they make all the way back from Honduras or Guatemala or whatever country they're coming in from, that they send these 5-year-old kids with the smugglers all the way over here, and perhaps that does happen. But what happens most of the time is that they come with their children all the way up. They try to come into the border, they get sent back, and then they figure out, well, if I send my child alone, then they'll make it. A lot of the kids are preteens and teenagers, and obviously it's still scary for anyone to undergo that kind of a trip, but most of them have to just make it from the Mexican border to the American border. So it's a very short trip. A lot of parents will judge, the decisions that these parents make, and I understand what decision or the factors that were made into making that decision. So I just, to each their own. It's a very big risk still sending young children, like toddlers, on their own with smugglers, just even through that river part. But it is a product of Title 42, not allowing families to stay together or to come in and to ask for asylum in the United States. So that started happening in great numbers, too great for the Border Patrol to keep up. What happens when a migrant comes into Border Patrol custody is they come in, they get processed at their processing centers like the one you see here, and they determine what's going to happen with them. Are they subject to Title 42, where they get sent back? Are they going to accompany children where now they have to hand them off to the Office of Refugee Resettlement so that they can figure out which detention facility to send them to before a guardian can claim them? Or are they going to be subject to Title 8 proceedings, which means they can either even be allowed to stay in the United States, they can get deported, they can be sent to ICE. So ICE will make those determinations later. All of that happens at these processing centers. But when you have children, it's when you have any actually, because it happens with other groups as well. When you have any group coming in these large numbers, you then have a bottleneck it creates, and with whatever agency is going to take them next. In this situation, it was the Office of Refugee Resettlement just wasn't moving fast enough. It can be a very slow process, especially to get the child out of those detention facilities that these children are placed in. And they were just getting all stuck in Border Patrol facilities, and the overcrowding became a problem. These photos got leaked by by Representative Henry Guayer's office, and you can see it's very tight quarters in there. During the pandemic, the capacity at these processing centers was reduced. So at one point, I believe it was on August 1st, bless you, I recall that we had, just in the Rio Grande Valley, we had 10,000 people in custody. That was about 800% over capacity. That was the peak of how bad things got. But the children getting bottlenecked there created a problem for everyone. And eventually, the federal government figured out what to do. They started opening these emergency intake shelters, where they would take the kids, and that way they can move them out of Border Patrol, and they could free up space again in these processing centers. So that was a big problem that we saw in the valley. But we've seen this happen before, even with adults when they come in large numbers. So like I mentioned, these parents are faced with these decisions. Should we wait on the border with our kids, or should we send them on their own? This is a mother who I met, and this is her daughter. There's her son, who is 16 years old. They all came together, but when they got here, the little boy decided, I'm gonna go on my own. And the mom said, okay. I mean, it wasn't an easy decision. She didn't just agree to it, but she told me, she cried, she sobbed when she remembered about her son having to cross alone. And this was after he was already safe. It's just a very painful decision that she had to make, and it's never easy, but it is a decision that many made because of the policy. Oh, we move on from immigration, but oh no, this is still immigration. I'm sorry. So that's kind of the policies that we're seeing. MPP came back, especially to the Valley, just like last week, I believe. There was some legal action that forced the federal government to begin MPP again. We've only placed a handful of migrants into MPP right now, but most of them are still either subject to Title 42 expulsions or Title 8 proceedings, but most of them end up getting sent back. So I do other things other than immigration, but most of the stuff ends up becoming immigration, like this story that kind of got me fired. So we got a tip that there was these children in a McAllen hotel, and they were getting picked up or dropped off around midnight, and so I went out there to go and figure out what was happening, and I parked outside, and I was waiting there around midnight with a camera, and I was able to see that there was a bus that would come, and but instead of dropping them off, it was actually picking them up. So this bus carried them out of the valley. I didn't know where, and that's kind of the part that got me in trouble. I can show you just briefly what that's about, or what that looks like.
Unmarked passenger vans were sitting empty outside the McAllen-Hampton Inn parking lot one midnight in mid-May. Highway cars, people, passing by without noticing what was by then an established routine. At 12:18 a.m., a local charter bus pulled in. Several adults got off and walked into the lobby. Moments later, they emerged with mask-clad teens wearing bewildered expressions and holding bags, following closely behind. On the way to the charter bus, the kids passed the white vans that belonged to MVM, a company contracted by ICE to drive children seeking asylum in the U.S. without their parents to hotels used as staging grounds. About 10 teens boarded the bus, now taking them to the next destination. For these tired travelers, like one Guatemalan teenage girl, the journey began a long time ago. She and her mom came to the U.S. border from Ciudad Juarez before the pandemic. Through the policy known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, they were sent back to Mexico to wait for the U.S. court hearing. For unknown reasons, they missed it. An immigration judge ordered they be sent back to Guatemala. But maybe there was another way in. The teen and the mother considered that typically children who come to the U.S. alone seeking asylum will have special protections. The government places them in Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters where a sponsor can claim them and take them out. That was the plan. The teen showed up in El Paso. She was placed in a shelter. Her siblings in the U.S. were waiting to take her. A judge didn't let that happen because of the deportation orders. ICE went for the girl and did something her El Paso attorney, Akeisha Solomon, had never seen.
This is my first experience having a client to be picked up by ICE and then moved to a different city, and especially to be moved to a few different cities.
The teen went to McAllen, leaving behind an incomplete asylum application in El Paso. It just needed her signature. Solomon connected with a local attorney from Pharr to take the document for the teen to sign.
All I knew is that she was at a hotel in McAllen. The deportation officer was not willing to tell us what hotel she was at.
North on 281 toward Edinburgh. In the early hours of May 15, it became clear the bus wasn't heading to an airport nearby. At 2 a.m., it reached Las Furias and took a right turn. An hour later, the low hum of the bus could be heard navigating through the small streets of Refugio, Texas. Dawn broke when it got to Houston. By 8 a.m., the bus crossed the state line into Louisiana. By noon, it pulled into the Alexandria Airport, about 580 miles from McAllen. Planes rolled onto the tarmac by the blue charter bus.
And I'll stop it there because it does go on a little bit more, but it ended up going all the way to Louisiana. I had no idea I was going to go there, and I had only asked for permission to go to the hotel, so my boss got upset and called me into HR, and later on had a talk, and then later on told me he was not going to renew my contract, and it was all because of I didn't ask for permission to do this, but I didn't know where we were going to end up. I really thought that they were going to go to the McAllen airport, and then I thought, well, maybe they'll go to a detention facility up north, which is maybe like 2 hours away, and so I didn't think that was a problem. I was just thinking about following this bus, and this bus, when it got to Louisiana, they called the cops on me, and I very nearly lost trail of the bus, but then I found it at the airport. They characterized me as following them from the U.S.-Mexico border, and I thought, well, that's a weird way to put it. I mean, I followed you from McAllen, and it's not technically the border. I mean, it's not a border city. McAllen is right above the border. Anyways, yes, that happened, and unfortunately, the little girl did get sent back to her home country, and ICE played these games, I guess you could say, with moving her around when they should have allowed for her attorney to have taken this form to her and have it signed. That's all it needed. But obviously that didn't happen. And this girl is not going to come back. Sorry. Probably one of the most memorable things that I've covered is being in a trial where this young man, I think he was 19 at the time, but when he allegedly committed a murder, he was 18, so he was younger. He was a teenager, and he lives in Starr County. If you guys recall, Starr County is right across that area in Mexico where there's all this fighting going on between cartels. But there's also a lot of smuggling through Starr County. During his trial, I was sitting next to his dad, like right here. We were really rubbing elbows. And then it came out during testimony that the teenager that he allegedly killed was the son of a rival smuggling family. And it was true. I mean, there's court records to indicate that that's true. But all of this came out. I didn't know it at the time. And I was writing all this down, and I was like, well, we are both stuck in a situation we both don't like. You're getting exposed, and I'm having to write next to you. And he was looking at my laptop, so it was very uncomfortable. His son, Jose Luis Garcia Jr., confessed to this crime, by the way. There was a long videotaped confession where he told the DPS investigator exactly where and how he did it. He took them along the house and told them, I waited for him to come out, and I was waiting behind this wall, and when he came out, I surprised him, and then I shot him, and I think he said maybe twice. So he reenacted the entire crime, and then he took them to the place where he dropped the weapon off in the river. This man was found not guilty. And the reason why was because the jury decided to throw out this videotaped confession because there were some problems with it, and there were some problems with it. At some point, he asked the investigator, am I being held? Are you guys arresting me? And they skipped over that. They kind of glossed over it. And then he asked again if he could leave. And he talked around it, the investigator. Those are things that should not have been ignored. He should have been told exactly what he was being held for. If he had the option to leave, he should have been given the option to leave. He even asked if he should get an attorney, and he wasn't allowed to really go forward with that. However, the jury also found that he was guilty on the tampering with the weapon charge, which is he disposed of this weapon. We don't understand how they made that decision, because if you toss out the videotape confession where he made both of these allegations, then either you toss both of them out, or you find both of them, or you consider both of them. So we don't know how that happened, but he got away with it. I learned later on through a source that his dad did not appreciate my reporting on all this. This is him after he had received the verdict of not guilty at midnight. I noticed that every time I saw him out in the court hallway, he se persinaba, like you saw there right now. And then he pointed up. He did serve a short sentence, and I think he's going to be out in a year or two. His dad, however, is not. After that, there was the investigation into the father's business came out, and it has been something that I've followed closely. And I won't show you the whole thing, but this is the area where they lived. It's an area known as Midway, and it was under surveillance for 2 years. It still is under surveillance because there's a lot of smuggling that happens there. Hundreds of pounds of cocaine a week. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of drugs to move. And so the father and some of other family members and an adjoining family, they all got convicted. They all actually pled guilty about 2 months ago, and they're going to get sentenced in, I believe, in the first week of February. But what's funny is that that family was tried by the same prosecutor that tried that family's fathers and uncles from the previous generation, like 15 years ago. So these businesses get handed down from family to family, and so that's what was believed was going to happen with Jose Luis Garcia Jr. And now that he might soon be out, that there might still be that opportunity. There's other stories that I could show you that I've done. And I won't, because I know that we've run out of time. I apologize. You know, that there's just so much of the border that I haven't showed you. I cover a lot of the bad stuff, and I apologize for not showing you the good stuff. There is so much good stuff. We have just obviously the best food, the best Mexican food. I don't know if you guys have heard of that ridiculous rivalry between San Antonio and Austin, who compete for the best Mexican tacos, and we're all looking like from South Texas, like you guys are not even part of the conversation. We know that everything on the border is like the most authentic you're gonna get. I mean, you have like these, you know, Mexican grandmas cooking food in your in the restaurants for you. So, anyways, the food is very good, and you know, we have a very strong culture. We're very proud of who we are. We're very proud of our biculturalism. I'm proud of being a fronteriza. You know, I not only, you know, speak both languages, but I also engage in both cultures, and that's something beautiful to be part in. I'm sure that, you know, that doesn't happen everywhere, but I apologize. There really is so much beautiful to cover, but unfortunately in news, we don't tend to cover, or at least, you know, the fluffy stuff. I think I have a story about saving a turtle that I could have showed you, but you probably wouldn't have learned much about the border that way. So if you do have any questions, I do believe that we have a mic. And I'm not a policy expert, so I will do my best to answer what I know. But if anyone has questions?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very, very, very much, Valerie.
Thank you.
And we do understand that some of you may have to run off to, I don't know, maybe a class, but we would like to take a minute or two for questions. If anyone has one, we would love to hand you the mic right here.
So I think, excuse me, thank you. I think I understood you got fired from your job doing film.
Oh, yeah.
And then you went into print?
Yes, I did have plenty of opportunities to move on because I wasn't technically fired, they just didn't renew my contract. But I chose to stay in the Rio Grande Valley.
Okay, so here's my question. Do you think you can have a bigger impact through film or through print? In this day and age when people want to see something.
Oh, sure.
How many people really read a lot?
I totally understand. I was just talking about this with Holly, who I told TV is just so much more fun, and it's so much more engaging visually. I mean, I brought you all clips, right, because they're more engaging than having to like read this out and have, you paint these things in your imagination. But what I do think is that the impact, the heavy lifting in journalism is done in the print world. And so I took a big pay cut to go to print, and I could have gotten jobs paying me double what I was making in the Valley after my whole incident with the TV station there. But one, I love the Valley, and two, I do think that the impact is done on the print side. You just get more time to focus on things that matter. In TV, I would get criticized about my hair. You guys heard it. I'm not like the best reporter. I mean, I'm not the best presenter, and TV focuses a lot on that. But what I do like about TV is the visuals, is the video. And so thankfully, the newspaper has allowed me to still get video, and we do sometimes put video into my stories, because I do think that certain things are just told better if you see them and if you read about them, to get the context. So I would say that we are moving into a more digital world where a lot of people don't watch TV news anymore. So that's also kind of a big struggle for the industry, for broadcast journalism. And we also struggle selling papers because everybody's reading it online. So if we can integrate kind of both of those elements into our digital platforms, and we are starting to, I think it will make for a better distribution. Yeah. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Valerie, for your presentation. I have a question. My name is Javier Tavera. I'm a professor here at the college.
Nice to meet you.
And I'm wondering why in your presentation there's this apparent narrative that all of this is a Mexican problem. And at the end, you focus on the cartels, but you focus on the Mexican cartels. You don't focus on the La M, you don't focus on the syndicates, you focus on the corruption of police, but there's corruption of police and border patrol also in the United States. You focus on the migrants, making this as an apparent Mexican problem. You focus on arms and weapons, knowing that the arms and weapons come from the majority come from the United States. When you focus on the United States, is the crisis on the United States side, but it's only a logistic problem, not right? So, do you get me? There's
Yeah, I totally...
and this might be just because this is your focus of reporting.
No, I completely understand. It is a fair question. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into it. Yes, no, I think I only briefly mentioned that the weapons come from up north, and I mean, they do, like you said, and like we all know, or at least if we keep up with the border news, we know that so much of the problem comes with straw purchases on the American side that end up going south. We do get a bunch of those arrests in the valley, and there's a lot of straw purchasing in the valley. Even I think FBI was the one who said that it's very concentrated there, obviously, because the cartel is right there. But no, this is definitely also part of on the American side. And I didn't talk a little about this, but when I mentioned earlier that we talk about border militarization or militarization of the border, you see it on the Mexican side because of all the fighting, but you also do see it on the American side. We have, in the valley, we have a heavy presence of federal, state, and local law enforcement, which can feel oppressing. And I went on a trip 2 years ago when I had my last vacation in Virginia, and I had I think I saw like 5 troopers on the road from there, from like outside of Texas to Virginia and back. And then I came back to the border, and you see them almost every mile. And that is not an exaggeration. There was time where you do see them 1 or 2 every mile, especially like in areas where they're concentrated, like Starr County, under something that's called Operation Lone Star. So we get stopped all the time. I've gotten pulled over just for having my long lights on a little bit too long. So no, there is definitely a problem on the American side. There's a problem with corruption of law enforcement officers on the American side. And I've reported on those as well. I did have a story that I was going to show you, but I didn't find there was a killing spree by a Border Patrol agent in Laredo. I'm not sure if y'all heard about it, but this happened, and I actually broke that story about 2 years ago. This man was just, he was killing women who had been working in prostitution, and I believe that's how he met them. And he was just killing them and then hiding their bodies, and he was using his knowledge as a Border Patrol agent to do that. In that same time frame, there was another Border Patrol agent who took advantage of the fact that there was and this was a domestic. Both of these are kind of domestic issues, but the problem is that they wouldn't have this knowledge or the opportunity if they wouldn't have their jobs in Border Patrol. So this other agent, he took advantage, knowing that there was a faulty, faulty sensor along the border, and he lured his girlfriend and his 1-year-old child to that area, and knowing that there wouldn't be anyone coming by because the sensor was down, and he killed the girlfriend, and he stabbed his 1-year-old child in the heart. And this was about a month ago before that killing spree with the other Border Patrol agent in the same sector. That's not corruption, but that is, they had an advantage because of their jobs. The Border Patrol agent who went on the killing spree used his knowledge to circumvent law enforcement for as long as he could, and managed to, to kill so many people doing that. But we do have a lot of corruption as well. We have had agents who help the cartel or who help the gangs that move the drugs, or the organizations that move the drugs. For example, in Stark County, we did have these two gangs that were operating there heavily, especially about 10 years ago. Now it seems like they work in different organizations, but yes, they were helping them. They were scouting for them. Most recently, we had a judge who was also part of it. So yes, there is a lot of corruption as well on the American side that assists and facilitates the movement of smugglers for either drugs or humans.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more? We do need to conclude, but can we squeak one more question in? Okay.
Thanks so much. Hi, my name is Anna. Thank you so much for speaking today. I was wondering, when you were reporting on the camps along the border, what was your relationship like with the families that you stayed with, and how did your position as a reporter affect how you built those relationships? And then how do you go about asking questions or witnessing what can be traumatic experiences in a way that's sensitive to the people that you're trying to listen to?
Yeah, it is a challenge, and thank you for that, because there's a lot of people who do this in a way that exploits them, and I'm sure that I've probably done that at the beginning of my career as well, so I won't say I'm free of it, but I have built some sensitivity, and I do tell people, of course, you do not have to talk to me. This is, I'm a reporter. I want to know what you're experiencing, and then I let them make their decision, right? And if they don't want to talk to me, I don't press them about it. I think I can be aggressive, but more with like when it's an accountability situation with like a political official. But with migrants, if they want to tell me, if they want to help me, then that's great. If not, hey, that's totally fine. Everyone's entitled to their privacy. There are certain stories that are very traumatizing to talk about. And for example, when I was talking to the families about their issues with depression and with kidnapping at the encampment in Reynosa, the woman who had been kidnapped and who had been sexually assaulted, she was talking about it. And we were sitting down at this table, and then these other migrants who were around her, they were listening, and they formed like this safety circle, and all of a sudden it became this safe space where they could talk about something that they don't normally feel comfortable talking about because of the fact that you never know who's listening. So they created the safe space for themselves. They knew who I was, and if I wanted to record them, I would ask them, hey, do you mind if I leave this recording? And it's so much easier, going back to the first question, to talk to people for newspaper than it is for TV, because their faces are not going to be on, or anything that is, that like I'm not taking photos or video of them, so they're more at ease talking to me. And I tell them, look, it's just going to be your words, and if you don't want, we don't have to use your real name. There's journalists that might disagree with me on using names, on the use of names, because it builds credibility to use a real name. But the problem is, if you are reporting about a migrant in Reynosa for a newspaper just right across the border, the people who are reading that newspaper could potentially know who you're talking about and can place them in danger. And so I don't care if other journalists disagree with me. I will change their names if they want to, or I will just use their first name, or I tell them, give me a name that you go by, but that maybe not your, like a nickname. So that helps build that trust. And I tell them, look, this is important to let other people know what you're going through, what the effect of a policy has been, and if they want to, they talk to me. Sometimes they talk because they just really want to talk to someone, and they just want to vent about what's happening. Sometimes they talk to me because they think I can help them, and I do my best to give them information that I might know that could help them. Like, if there's a group of attorneys who are coming, I will tell you, what you need to know. I think the thing that really, that I truly believe in as far as in journalism is access to information. And so if I have some information that I can share with you, I will share it with you, as long as, of course, it's not confidential, like sources. I don't disclose who they are, or anything that they don't want me to discuss. Even the thing that I said earlier about a source, I checked with them before I shared it today. So just letting them know, this is who I am, this is my mission, and if you want to talk to me, I will make sure to protect you in as far as I can, and do so, and handle your story in a way that's sensitive. Now, when they have really traumatic experiences, and they share them with me, I normally don't ask them for too much detail other than what they've given me, because I know that it's already difficult for them to talk about it. So I try to just kind of gauge how they feel about it, and if they feel okay, if they're talking and they're not, breaking down, then obviously, if they were to break down, I would, I know that in TV a lot of people keep rolling because they want those tears on camera, and I always felt it was uncomfortable, and undignified, and so I would be like, hey, let's stop, and let's not, let's give them their time to cry, and then, compose themselves, and then if they want to continue, then they can. But a lot of it is just kind of like a judgment call, and I do try to be aware that if this was me, if this was my mom being interviewed, how would I want them to be talked to, and how would I want their words to be illustrated? So I just try to, remain as sensitive as I can to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again, Valerie. Thank you all for being here. That concludes our convocation for today.